there's a whole plethora of environmental issues that we're trying to tackle. Where you are, US, where I am, Australia, some of the two worst countries for such measures, second and third most endangered plant species. So there's a long way to come. But the way I frame it is the big evil villain we're trying to overcome is in human nature, so how we view our place as humanity, as people on this planet. I think something which is really important to realise and which has been lacking over the 50, 60 years of conservation to date has been some of that perspective shift, some of the shift in mindset to realise that we as humans are doing an injustice on the world. We're not respecting our place in these natural systems. We're not understanding how much we're reliant on nature. I think COVID in many ways has been somewhat a mixed blessing in that respect, in that despite all the damage it's caused, it has shown us just how connected we are with these natural systems. So being a zoonotic disease coming from this illegal wildlife trade, bats, pangolins also implicated. That means that finally we're coming to realise just how deeply, intimately connected we are with the health and the state of ecosystems.
Heroes are an inspiring group of people. Every one of them, from the larger-than-life comic book heroes you see on the big silver screen, to the everyday heroes that let us live the privileged lives we do. Every hero has a story to tell, from the doctor saving lives at your local hospital, to the war veteran down the street who risked his life for our freedom, to the police officers and the firefighters who risk their safety to ensure ours. Every hero is special and every story worth telling. But there is one class of heroes that I think is often ignored. The entrepreneur, the creator, the producer. The ones who look at the problems in this world and think to themselves, you know what, I can fix that. I can help people. I can make a difference. Then they go out and do exactly that by creating a new product or introducing a new service. Some go on to change the world. Others make a world of difference to their customers. Welcome to The Hero Show. Join us as we pull back the masks on the world's finest heropreneurs and learn the secrets to their powers, their success, and their influence, so you can use those secrets to attract more sales, make more money, and experience more freedom in your business. I'm your host, Richard Matthews, and we are on in 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome back to The Hero Show. My name is Richard Matthews, and today I am live on the line with Elliot Connor, who is out of Sydney, Australia. Are you there, Elliot?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm here. It's morning for me, so it's my second call for the day, but looking forward to a wonderful conversation and sharing a bit of my story.
Awesome, yeah. And so I want to do a quick introduction for our audience who may or may not have heard of you before. So Elliot is to date our youngest guest here on The Hero Show. You said you're 17 years old, and you are in charge of the Human Edge Projects, which is a environmental volunteering and conservationist group that you've worked in, I think, 104, 105 countries right now. You're also a podcast host, a TEDx speaker, conservationist, basically a change maker. So what I want you to start off with for me, Elliot, is tell me a little bit about who you are. What is it that you do? What's your primary, like your service offerings, I guess, for, and I know mostly it's in the non-for-profit space, but let us know a little about what it is that you actually offer to the marketplace, and who your primary beneficiaries are.
Yeah, so I say my goal is to reframe the human relationship with nature. And the way the Human Nature Projects does that is to create a community within the conservation sector. So acting as an entry point for the public into environmental volunteering, providing a easy, tailored route into creating change, creating opportunities for people to make the world a better place in the environmental sector. So it started as a result of my experience and many others of finding it very, very challenging to find these sort of placements, these sort of opportunities. Many of the larger names failed to offer a route in for the public. So Human Nature Projects is acting as a solution to that. So providing a tailored volunteering experience to people across 100-odd countries.
Awesome. And do you head that project up yourself?
Yeah, so I founded it 12, 13 months ago, thereabouts, and been running it ever since, the CEO.
Awesome. That is really incredible and quite, what would you call it? It is advanced for someone who's 16, 17 years old when you started that. That's really cool. Hope my children take after someone like you and get onto the business world early, because that's they're the ones who change the world, right? So
Yeah.
What I want to find out from you then is your origin story, right? So every good comic book hero has their origin story. It's the thing that made them into the hero they are today. And we basically want to hear that story. Were you born a hero? Have you always wanted to do this kind of work? Were you bit by a radioactive spider that made you wanted to get into the volunteering aspect of conservationism and really running a non-for-profit organization? And I normally ask if you started in a job, but I think you might be a little too young to have started in a job. So, basically we want to know where you came from. How did you get to this point, 12, 13 months into being the CEO of a conservationist volunteering organization that's operating in 105 countries?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it depends how far back you want to look. So I've always been interested in nature, fascinated by natural history, brought up in that context. So you might be able to tell from the accent, but I'm British by birth. So bird watching, long walks in the countryside is very much part of that culture. And moving over to Australia a dozen years ago, I had many more opportunities to follow that. Thankfully, much more green space here in Sydney, and that allowed me to keep up that passion. But for the past 5 years now, I've been volunteering very, very extensively in environmentalism in this space, mostly locally to start off with. But then about 18 months ago, so in January of 2019, I spent a month volunteering at a rescue and rehabilitation centre for birds of prey, hedgehogs, bats, all sorts of things. Whatever creatures could be found in this remote spot in southern France. So it was a nice way to spend summer holidays, if slightly chilly. And I passed the time. I spent some of the long winter nights over there researching the operations of about 200 major environmental NGOs. So it was my way of networking, seeing what was going on, seeing how I could better integrate myself into these spaces. And that led me, almost unintentionally, to the conclusion that my experience, as mentioned earlier, I found it quite challenging as a youth, trying to get into these circles. But it showed me that probably wasn't all that uncommon. Many of these larger names, these figureheads of the space, were struggling to engage volunteers, to communicate what they were doing to members of the public, to involve them in that. And that sort of led me down a path of several months, slowly coming up with some of the frameworks, some of the philosophies, which are now central to Human Nature Projects, my charity, which has been running since late June, early July of last year. That was probably a pivotal moment for me, a turning point, which led me to start up this organisation. And doing that, starting up Human Nature Projects, has certainly transformed my life. That's the abbreviated version of how it all came about. But obviously, it's a process of many, many years.
Yeah. That's really cool. It sounds, it reminds me a little bit of my son. He's 10 years old, and he has been obsessed with birds of prey since he was about 3. And he wants to be a falconer, like really, really badly.
Wow.
It was funny. I remember when we went to the San Diego Zoo a whole bunch when he was real little, and he was on a first name basis with the head bird trainer over there for all the birds of prey. And I remember like one of the first shows we went to, they asked for questions, like, who has questions? And he's like, I have a question. Of course, he's 3, right? So, everyone thinks he's cute and adorable. And his first question to the bird trainer there is, are you an ornithologist? Right. And at 3 years old, he could pronounce that word and knew what it meant. And the trainer did a double take. It's like, wait, can you repeat that? Are you an ornithologist? And he's like, no, I just train the birds. And he's like, well, what good are you? I want to talk to the ornithologist on staff. So anyways, he got to meet the San Diego Zoo's ornithologist and all that fun stuff. And right now he's actually got a countdown timer for he can start falconry training at 12. So
Wow.
he can tell you how many days he has left until he turns 12 when he can start his falconry training. So I know falconry is sort of it's under the umbrella of conservationism, and it helps raise birds and do some other things. And he knows more about it than I do, but he might be on a a similar path. So it's cool to see that that you're doing that. And so your organization, what you help people do is you help the public get involved in volunteering in different conservation projects.
Yes. So the way it's set up is our volunteers can engage sort of on the two levels. So they're part of a national team, so a collective of volunteers within their country who obviously then engage in projects of relevance to the community. So tailored to whatever the needs may be for that particular country. Obviously, the environmental issues will be very different depending on whereabouts in the world you are, what the context may be. And then they can engage with international working groups, which are interest or skills based. So there's about 10 of those, and they'll self nominate for those depending on how they want to contribute. So where they're coming from, what skills they want to utilize for the cause. And that very much allows them to help out in a way which is relevant to them. And I think that's quite important, obviously, working with volunteers, working in a space where such a diverse range of people is required. There's such a range of skill sets you need, such a range of people from all sorts of backgrounds, which are necessary to make the whole succeed.
Like complete projects, yeah.
It's very effective.
So my question for you then is probably an obvious one for our audience is mostly entrepreneurs. Is with a nonprofit organization like this, how do you drive revenue to pay the bills, right? To make sure that you can actually continue doing what you're doing. Is it all donation based, or do you guys do other things that drive revenue? How's the revenue game played in this space?
Yeah, so Human Nature Projects is all about integrating people into conservation. So it's a lot of crowdfunding actually, which helps. I think it allows our volunteers to become invested in the issues, to know that that's behind it, to be part of that process. So I think it fits in quite neatly with some of the mission, some of the vision of the project, but a lot of crowdfunding, and for some of the larger projects, then that's grants from other bodies, whatever they may be. Either on the national scale or on the international scale, depending on.
So have you had to learn how to manage the whole grant process and actually working with the government agencies to get grants?
Yeah. It's
how do you find that when you're the when you're under the legal age for signing documents and that kind of stuff?
It's a nightmare. When I first had to register Human Nature Projects, that was a long process. So gaining that charity status, obviously, I'm 17, so I was 16 at the time, very much underage for being on a board. Even.
Yeah. Your signature is not legally binding until you're 18 in most countries.
Yeah, it was a logistical nightmare to get that set up, but slowly working out how it all fits together and coming out the most efficient processes to get things done. Yes.
So with the crowdfunding, are you guys using some of the big platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, or do you have your own crowdfunding platforms that you're developing yourselves?
It's largely internally run, so I think that helps simplify things. But the benefit of being a non-profit is we get a lot of that software for free, or certainly discounted in many cases. So we've got various tech platforms that we utilize for various activities, and depending on what we're running, or if say this major campaign, major drive we're doing, as we did a drive with Just Giving last year, which was one of those platforms we used. But it depends, and we'll move between a few different ones, seeing which works best. But largely, it's just internally run, so that simplifies things greatly.
Awesome. So from an organizational standpoint, how many people do you guys actually have on staff now that are actually managing projects, who either are volunteering or working working for human nature projects and not necessarily working like on whatever your projects are, if that makes sense. Not your volunteers, but the people who are actually like running the organization.
Yeah, so all of our national teams have their own structure. So they'll have a national director who reports to me and to the executive committee, which is about a dozen people across all over the world, engaging in different roles. But yeah, so I speak with about 50 national directors each week, or thereabouts, and run this executive committee of a dozen people on a similar timescale. So those are the sort of two core groups, but on the whole, it's fairly flat in structure, which I think helps to manage that volume of people.
Yeah,
it helps to make them feel engaged, involved. They can reach out to me through the secretary to ask any questions, query, provide feedback, which helps to add some transparency to operations. But yeah, it's the national directors and the executive.
That's incredibly impressive to have that much going, and yeah, it's very impressive to have all that going in less than a year. So that's very cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your superpowers, which, right, it's what you bring to the table. Every iconic hero has their own superpower, whether that's fancy flying suit made by genius intellect or the ability to call down thunder from the sky. In the real world, heroes have what I call a zone of genius. It's a skill or a set of skills that either you were born with or you developed over time that really helps energize all your other skills. The superpower is really what sets you apart and allows you to help, slay the people's villains in their own lives and help come on top in their own journeys. So with that framing, what do you think your superpower is that you bring to the Human Nature projects?
Oh, what's my superpower? I like how you set that up. I think for me, what I enjoy most, what certainly helps Human Nature projects, is the storytelling element. So I speak of leadership as being able to tell your story, tell about this journey, this vision you have, and bring others with you. So having that ability to communicate clearly where you're headed, energize others, inspire them to join you on that journey is something which can be really challenging. So for me, it's slightly paradoxical. I'm a born introvert. I don't naturally take to the whole leadership, public speaking domain of things. But certainly developing that skill set of late. You mentioned earlier, I did that TEDx speech, spoken at various international conferences over this past year. So learning all of that, being able to communicate with others, engage them in human nature projects and outside, so with some of our philosophies, some of our messaging, reaching beyond, then that's been very, very powerful. I believe it's something which is perhaps understated in this field, so in conservation, and also more broadly. So I speak of conservation as 4 C's, which is a sort of our way at Human Nature projects of communicating these people metrics we use. So 4 C's are connection, curiosity, creativity, and collaboration, which are, I guess, 4 tenets of what we do. These 4 standpoints we use to measure our progress, our engagement, these philosophies we work with. And that really, really helps to keep our volunteers interested in what we do. It helps to keep them part of the process. So they're very much behind all of our projects and actions. They are at the heart of everything. And that's really, really powerful as a model. So I would hope that my superpower is in storytelling and using that as a tool for community building.
Yeah. So I actually I grew up like you, right? I was a born introvert as well, and had to learn the skills of I can pretend to be an extrovert really well now. And one of the things that I have learned over the years is that the ability to communicate and talk with other people and tell stories and hear their stories is a skill set that you develop, and it's not dependent on whether or not you are an introvert or an extrovert, right? And the difference for me has always been understanding that like extroverts are going to get their energy from that communication, And introverts are going to have their energy sapped by that communication. So you have to just know that, hey, I'm going to go out and do this thing, and I'm going to need to have rest periods built in. Whereas someone who's an extrovert is going to get energy from those kind of interactions. So, as someone who's been through the same path, just make sure you're building in rest periods after big speaking engagements or working with a whole group of people. Because, you're obviously developing the skill set of the communication. And then it's just learning how to manage your own energy levels that go along with it.
No, definitely. Certainly resonate with that. Can be really, really trying. I just started this podcast of mine, the Human Nature podcast. So that's a whole new skill set I've had to learn. One with this communication, but it's trying to, build all of that in, build as much engaging, optimistic messaging as possible, whilst realizing that it is a trying process for me. It's not something I'm naturally drawn to. Yeah. But it's something I can learn and do effectively.
My other thought on that too is just the whole storytelling aspect. We talk about this all the time on the Hero Show, right? So the whole Hero Show is really based on this idea that we can, if we tell enough stories about, modern day heroes, that we can change the cultural narrative. And the reason for that is that human beings we're a story-born people, right? And so we connect with each other on stories, and we judge the depth and the breadth of our relationships based on the stories we have with each other. So I tell my family and my kids and people I work with that, you can, I have this little thing that's kind of fun. An acquaintance is someone whose name you know, but whose story you don't, right? And a friend might be someone whose name you know, and a bit of their story, right? Some of their stories. And a best friend is someone who their name and so many of their stories that the only way to get to know them better is to go out and create new stories together, right? To have experiences together. And so you judge your relationships based on stories, right? And I'm 35, I got a wife, and my wife and I laugh at each other all the time because it's like, we can't tell each other any stories we haven't already heard. So the only way that our relationship gets any closer is if we continue to go out and build stories together, whether that's raising our family or adventuring or building businesses or whatever it is we're doing, right? Even just going out to dinner and doing those things, we have to create new stories. And so I always encourage people that to build relationships is first you have to learn how to listen and ask and delve into other people's stories, and then learn to practice your own stories, how to tell them and how to work on them. If you really want to build a relationship with someone, go out and adventure together, right? Go out and do something with someone else and actually build memories and build relationships that way. So I think you are spot on that stories are the key to growing any organization.
Definitely. No, I love that imagery, that storytelling central to all these relationships. You have to go out and make new stories. I think it's a wonderful image to think of. It's something, which I've certainly found resonate with. Hopefully, over the next few years, we'll see many, many new stories develop. And my experiences around human nature projects.
So I'm curious, just from a marketing standpoint, because of what you're doing, some of the visual storytelling aspects might be a really cool way to start getting some of the videos and other things of like the projects that you're working on, and using those as marketing to attract more volunteers and maybe more donations and other things for crowdfunding and whatnot. So that'll be a whole new set of things to figure out and master over the next couple of years.
Well, some of my background is in wildlife photography and filmmaking. That's certainly where I'm looking to head towards in the future. Definitely trying to build in some of those skills, some of that skill set. And the podcast, it's another revenue generator for human nature projects. So that's certainly assisted, hoping to work with the media working group. So some of those people with the background in some of that digital storytelling, so some of the photography, some of the videography, to develop human nature projects, messaging, and hopefully, as you say, drive new volunteers, drive new donations.
I'm with you. I've got like camera gear sitting all around on my desk around me here because like I'm just as much into the photography stuff that as you are. I do a little bit of the wildlife stuff, not professionally. It's just I think animals are cool, so we take pictures of them when I can. But yeah, My problem has always been with the photography set is because I don't do it in any sort of professional capacity, that I can't bring myself to spend the money on the nice gear that is required to do a really high level wildlife photography. And so you have an advantage there in that you have an organization that requires really good visual storytelling. So you have an excuse to get the good gear.
Yes, yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier is some of the moving into the workforce. So my first job was with a Domino's, so pizza maker, a pizza chain, and that was just to get this photography gear. So I spent 3 months working there. And, it came up in an interview the other day, actually, but I hadn't considered it this way. The question was, did that help me to know what I didn't want to do? So push me further into environmentalism. And I guess that is true, but it isn't something I thought of directly. I think I didn't have a particularly pleasant experience in that job. I did serve its purpose, so 3 months on, I managed to get a nice 600mm telephoto lens. But yeah, it is part
Those
of
are
that
not
journey.
cheap.
Yeah, it's just behind me actually. But yeah, I love photography. I love those digital storytelling mediums, and that was a big step for me. It certainly helped in this journey, being able to have that to draw upon, and hoping to make it more integral to that into the future.
Yeah. You'll also have to start working out to hold the 600mm lens up. So
Yes,
those things are what, like 12, 14 pounds almost.
it's proper heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess you guys don't do pounds over there. You would do kilograms.
No.
So.
I think my kit together is about 5 kilos, 6 kilos.
Yeah.
Conversions.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the superpower, the flaw, right? So, everyone has his kryptonite, and every Wonder Woman can't remove her bracelets of victory without going mad. So you probably have a flaw that has held you back in growing your organization, something that you struggled with. Maybe some of the things that I struggled with, perfectionism, kept me from shipping, lack of self-care, which means that I let clients walk all over me, or something like being a visionary, right? Where you know what you want to do, but then lacking the discipline to do the actual minutia to implement something, which is also, they're all solvable things, but they're all problems that I've struggled with. But I think more important than what the flaw that you've run into is how have you worked on overcoming it so you can continue to grow and continue to reach your own vision. And hopefully sharing that will help someone in our audience who struggles with the same thing learn from your experience.
Yeah, I think one of the major challenges I had to overcome, at least initially, was the self-confidence. So I mentioned it was in January. I had the idea for human nature projects, but I didn't start it till late June, early July. So it took a long time for me to work up some of that confidence, some of that groundwork until I felt ready to start that venture. It was a major new chapter in my life, and for several months after that, I was working very, very long hours with almost no breaks, just setting it up, just bringing in some of those early volunteers, setting up all these processes, establishing some of the workflows necessary to see that organization thrive. But for me, yeah, it was very much about realizing I could do this. I could set out with such a grand vision. I had no idea that it would be so successful. I set some ambitious goals, and we actually surpassed them very early on. But that it was a major process for me, trying to find that in myself, to be able to communicate clearly such an ambitious, such a, I like to say, a pioneering agenda for an organization, especially working with youth in that youth space, which itself is quite groundbreaking. It's a very new region of conservation, environmentalism, and trying to work across country borders, across generations, across languages, cultures. It's definitely a process you have to work up to. So that was one thing which definitely held me back initially. And I think the second part to that is having the confidence to delegate as well. I think quite similar to yourself, I'm somewhat of a perfectionist. So I didn't naturally take to delegating some of those responsibilities off. I very much like to do all my correspondence, do all my messaging myself, do all this organisation in a minutiae without drawing on the advice and support of others. But I've gained a lot from the mentorship, from the support I received throughout this process. So working now very closely with the executive committee, with national directors, to share thoughts, share resources, share ideas, and some of the power behind that has been quite incredible for me to see.
Yeah, and it took you a lot less time to figure out you needed to delegate than it took me. Right, it took me like 9 years. And I was like, no, I can do it all myself, and you figured it out in 9 months. so that's probably why your organization has grown so fast. You learn some of those lessons quick, and move on, which is a useful thing. So, just curious question: in all this, you mentioned working long hours and doing all these things, put all this time in. Are you still doing schooling as well? Like, is primary education still on your plate, or did you finish early? Like, how's that going?
Yeah, I'm last year of high school right now, actually. So I finish major exams in mid-November. So very much under the pump in that regard. It's my day job, the academics, keeping whatever I can from environmentalism on the side with the early mornings, the late evenings, trying to fit it all in. It's not an easy juggle, not an easy balance to keep, but I manage it. I think the secret behind it is I love what I do. So I'm happy to put in the hours, happy to put in the hard work to see that it succeeds, which is important for any.
And I assume your parents are supportive in this, because otherwise it would be almost impossible.
Yeah. Broadly speaking, they're environmentally literate, come from that background, so very fortunate that they have some understanding of what I'm up to, that they're able to appreciate, support in some ways that process. But yeah.
They probably still think you're a little bit nuts, but that's okay. My parents still think I'm nuts.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about your common enemy, right? And we say every superhero has an arch nemesis, right? It's a thing they're constantly having to fight against in their world, right? In the world of business, it takes on many forms, but generally speaking, we put it in the context of your clients. And since you're in a non-for-profit space, it'd be like the organizations that you're working with, or the volunteers you're trying to get, or the governments that you're working with, whatever it is. And it's generally, it's a mindset, or it's a flaw, or it's something that you're constantly having to struggle to overcome, right? And if you had your magic wand and you could just go into a new situation and bop it on the head with your magic wand and make that go away, what is that thorn in your side, your arch nemesis, so to speak, that is you're constantly having to fight against to get the results you're trying to get?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. Obviously, there's a whole plethora of environmental issues we're trying to tackle. Where you are, US, where I am, Australia, some of the two worst countries for such measures, second and third most endangered plant species. So there's a long way to come. But the way I frame it is the big evil villain we're trying to overcome is in human nature. So how we view our place as humanity, as people on this planet. I think something which is really important to realize, and which has been lacking over the 50, 60 years of conservation to date, has been some of that perspective shift, some of the shift in mindset, to realize that we as humans are doing an injustice on the world. We're not respecting our place in these natural systems. We're not understanding how much we're reliant on nature. I think COVID in many ways has been somewhat a mixed blessing in that respect, in that despite all the damage it's caused, it has shown us just how connected we are with these natural systems. So being a zoonotic disease coming from this illegal wildlife trade, bats, pangolins also implicated, that means that finally we come to realize just how deeply, intimately connected we are with the health, the state of ecosystems. So I think
yeah. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being at the top of that chain, right?
Yeah, Yeah. I think it'll be a long journey to get to this new nature, this new human nature we're working towards. But the end goal is to respect a sense of equity, of equality between humans and animals, an equal right to be on this planet as itself input, but also how heavily reliant we are on nature. It's about 40% of GDP comes from natural services. 80% of the Sustainable Development Goals heavily reliant on us halting biodiversity loss. So I think if we are to move forward as a society and as humankind, then we very much need to tackle environmental issues alongside social and cultural ones.
Absolutely. The Hero Show will be right back. Hey there, fellow podcaster. Having a weekly audio and video show on all the major online networks that builds your brand, creates fame, and drives sales for your business doesn't have to be hard. I know it feels that way because you've tried managing your show internally and realize how resource intensive it can be. You felt the pain of pouring 8 to 10 hours of work into just getting 1 hour of content published and promoted all over the place. You see the drain on your resources, but you do it anyways because you know how powerful it is. Heck, you've probably even tried some of those automated solutions and ended up with stuff that makes your brand look cheesy and cheap. That's not helping grow your business. Don't give up though. The struggle ends now. Introducing Push Button Podcasts, a done-for-you service that will help you get your show out every single week without you lifting a finger after you've pushed that stop record button. We handle everything else: uploading, editing, transcribing, writing, research, graphics, publication, and promotion, all done by real humans who know, understand, and care about your brand almost as much as you do. Empowered by our own proprietary technology, our team will let you get back to doing what you love while we handle the rest. Check us out at pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero for 10% off the lifetime of your service with us, and see the power of having an audio and video podcast growing and driving micro celebrity status and business in your niche without you having to lift more than a finger to push that stop record button. Again, that's pushbuttonpodcast.com/hero. See you there. Now back to the Hero Show. So the flip side then, which I think your last statement really drives into, is your driving force, right? And, you know, if your common enemy is the thing you're fighting against, which you mentioned, you know, our human nature and not understanding our place in that role, you know, your driving force is what you're fighting for, right? So just like Spider-Man fights to save New York, or Batman fights to save Gotham, or Google fights to index and categorize all the world's information, what is it that you are fighting for with the Human Nature Project?
Yeah. So we've talked bits and pieces, sort of circling around this point, but human nature is fighting for a worldview in which humans and animals can thrive and coexist. Definitely what drives me is a mixture between the two. So working with many inspiring leaders, inspiring individuals across so many countries, speaking to them a dozen countries daily is incredibly motivating, and also having those opportunities to connect with the animals themselves. And so I still do animal rescues, animal rehab here in Sydney, and so being able to build strong relationships, forge those bonds with living creatures is incredible. It's a life-changing experience. So Human Nature Project's driving force is to be an enabler for that, giving people those opportunities to reconnect with nature where we can, try to educate, so decrease what is a widening knowledge gap where it comes to what we don't know about the natural world, and ultimately provide that entry point into the field, which unfortunately is lacking. So yeah, it's the stories behind the volunteers we work with is what keeps me going, what keeps Nature Projects rolling forward. Some incredible people who have joined that network and fighting day in, day out to make it succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminded me of something else that, because you know, you're talking about like the things that you guys are working towards, and really understanding our place. One of the things that I've been really fascinated with, and if we ever decide as a family to settle down at some point and, you know, purchase land and do any of those things instead of the traveling life we're doing now, is looked into sustainable farming, right? Okay. And so we just watched a documentary, which I don't know if you've seen yet. It's out on Netflix, called the Biggest Little Farm, and it's about a 200-acre farm in California here in the U.S. That they purchased, and it was all dead. Right, everything was dead, and they came in and they started growing all of the stuff in nature the way that it would grow, like normally, with a very minimal human footprint. Some organization, things like that, but like learning how to, like, if you have chickens, you don't put up fences and shoot all the coyotes. You get dogs that you teach how to protect the chickens. And there's like this whole, and they talk about all the different systems and stuff like that. But everything from, they've got snails that are eating their fruits, so they bring in ducks and they put in a duck pond. And like learning how to actually use nature to take care of itself, right? And to actually build the ecosystem. And it was really, really fascinating to see that, like, the gophers came and the wolves came, or the coyotes came, but it also, they started bringing in bats, bringing in owls, and bringing in other things. And like, you start seeing, like, once they built all of this system up over 7 to 10 years, their production is like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times what, the line agricultural machine farming is. So significantly more production out of the same land. And then the land is healthier. The animals are healthier. They're all sort of living in harmony with those things. And the like when they had all the big fires that happened a couple of years ago, the fires went all around their farm because their farm was fine. Like, it can handle itself. It had a good water table, and their plants and everything were good. It wasn't all dried out. It wasn't it hadn't been destroyed by the way that we're trying to do it with machines and single crop farming and that kind of stuff. And it's just really fascinating to see that, like, there actually is already proven paths forward, and things like, how can humans feed ourselves with this interaction with human nature, and how can we take care of the animals and be a part of the solution instead of a part of the problem. So,
no, definitely, I think it's really, really interesting at that point to bring up, just how we've developed these big machine agriculture systems, and now increasingly, as our knowledge improves, as we develop new concepts, new ideas, we're just seeing a reversal, moving back towards more traditional methods, realizing that they were actually very effective because we were doing them alongside nature as opposed to working against it. So all these permaculture techniques, which can drive really efficient but also healthy farms, can be really interesting to look into. You reminded me of another story where I am. So here in Sydney, or in Australia's east coast, there was a wonderful story of a little penguin colony. So these were being preyed upon by some of the introduced pests, heavily under threat. But their solution to that was to train a group of German Shepherd dogs to protect them. So it's something you would never think of. I mean, if you were going about it, you'd set up security cameras, you'd see what was going on, you'd realise there were lots of rats, lots of feral cats preying on these birds. But then to introduce dogs into this system, to train them, to respect them, to imagine that they could coexist with penguins in such a harmonious way, which ultimately is unnatural, but to realise that that's possible is incredibly visionary. So there is so much we don't know.
That's what they did with the dogs and the chickens.
Yeah,
they trained their dogs to take care of their 200 plus chickens, kept them from getting eaten by raccoons and birds of prey and coyotes and everything, which is really cool.
Definitely.
So I want to talk a little bit about your own personal heroes, right? So we say every hero has their own personal mentors, just like Frodo had Gandalf, or Luke had Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Robert Kiyosaki had his rich dad, or Spider-Man had his Uncle Ben, right? Who are some of your heroes? Were they real-life mentors, maybe speakers, authors, peers who were a couple of years ahead of you? And how important were they to what you've accomplished so far in such little time for what you've already done?
Yeah, well, I have many heroes, many people, both alive and dead, who've inspired me. One who I jumped on very early is Steve Parrish, who's probably Australia's foremost photographer. But he invited me up actually to a weekend masterclass of his up in Queensland, so North Coast, Northeast. And what he showed me over that time, I spent lodging with him in his studio, seeing his workflow and hearing his teachings, he showed me this creative life purpose of his, which I found really, really touching. It's basically his way of communicating like an overarching vision for what he does. So his work is all about using nature as a solution to mental health issues, being able to communicate that message, connect people, and ultimately decrease the prevalence of these conditions in our society. So that really touched me, and that led me to forming some of my own worldview, some of these philosophy of mine. Some others, Gerald Durrell, a wonderful conservationist, author, communicator, storyteller, really influential in the sort of conservation optimism movements. So reframing environmentalism in a very positive light, similar to what you're doing with entrepreneurship, but trying to frame the issue as positive as opposed to negative. So the world's not collapsing, but there is all these people trying to save it, and trying to look at things that way. Jane Goodall, I think she's an incredible woman, still alive just, likewise with Attenborough, both pioneers, leaders in this movement. Goodall, of course, very influential in reframing how we look at ourselves as humans, and Attenborough opening up environmentalism to many, many more people. So yeah, there have been many, many amazing people who I look up to. I just hope that my generation, the upcoming leaders, can fill their footsteps in advance of the cause, because there's some big footsteps following.
Yeah, well, I think if you and my son are any indicator of what the next generation is like, I think we're on a good path.
Yes, we hope.
So I want to talk a little bit about your guiding principles, right? So one of the things that makes heroes heroic is they live by a code. For instance, Batman never kills his enemies. He only ever brings them to Arkham Asylum. So as we wrap up the interview, I want to talk about top 1 or 2 principles that you use regularly in your life every day. You know, maybe something that you wish you'd known when you first started out on your own hero's journey.
Yeah, I think for me, it comes very much down to this authenticity as a leader. I think that's something I find very, very important. So being able to be very open, very plain, clear, vulnerable even at times about what's going on for yourself, being able to tell that to others, open up, being able to hear their responses, work with them efficiently as a leader in the truest sense, that can be really powerful. It's something I've struggled with tremendously. But we talked earlier about storytelling. So telling your story, but being true to it, being true to yourself throughout this journey as a leader, working through these issues alongside others, has been a principle I've striven very hard to work towards. And we started out this interview, I mentioned my vision, so reframing the human relationship with nature. So over the course of that, seeing how it's evolved, seeing what I've done, striven to do to further that cause, then being very true to that mission as well, being true to some of my goals in that space, working towards milestones, seeing whether or not I made them, but in either way, learning throughout the process. That's how I tackle it.
Yeah. Authenticity is a hard thing to grasp. A lot of people they're not even authentic with themselves, right? It's a hard thing to tell yourself the truth, but then also to tell others and move forward, right? And actually, you mentioned being vulnerable. That's a hard thing to do, and something that I know I've struggled with, in growing my business and being the CEO of a small team. And learning to be like, hey, here's where we're at, here's what we're struggling with, here's what we need to work on, these kind of things. It's a difficult place to be, but it's how you grow, right? And it's how you grow in your relationships with your kids and with my wife. I know occasionally I screw up and I have to apologize to my children, and that's a hard thing to do too, right? So it's like it's one of those being authentic and being vulnerable is a hard skill to master. But it allows you to be a good leader in whatever space you're in, right? Whether that's leader of your family or leader of your organization or, leader of a conservation group that's working in 105 countries, which is super cool. So that basically, wraps up our interview. But I do have one little thing I do at the end of all of our interviews that is, it's a selfish thing I do for myself, and I call it the Heroes Challenge. And I do this basically to get access to stories that I might miss out on otherwise. So the question is pretty simple. Do you have someone in your life or in your network that you think has a cool entrepreneurial story? Who are they? First names are fine. And why do you think they should come share their story here with the Hero Show?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's one I had to think for a few minutes about, actually, because I do work with some really inspiring people. But the one who I eventually settled on, who came to mind, is someone who I've spoken to very briefly, but hoping to continue to do so in future. I'm actually interviewing him next week on my own podcast. It's called Reynolds, and really, really interesting story, working at the intersection of technology and environmentalism. So moving from some quite large corporate work, working with big names in the space, to starting up some of his own ventures, starting up these ideas, these ventures with a goal towards trying to create accessibility in environmentalism, to help everyone know how they can contribute, to provide actions, realizable goals for them to do so. So really, really interesting story he's got, and that would be my answer, I think.
Awesome. So we'll reach out afterwards and see if we can connect with him. And then we have our classic send-off, right? In comic books, there's always the crowd who is standing around clapping for the acts of heroism, for the hero who saved all their lives or stopped the train or whatever it is. So as we close, what I want to know is where people can find you, right? If they want to be a part of the conservation efforts that you're doing, if they want to volunteer in whatever country they're in, or if maybe they want to work in the organization, something like that, where can they find you? Where can they listen to you? Where can they light up the bat signal, so to speak, and be like, hey, you know what, I would like to be a part of changing this conversation with how human nature interacts with Mother Nature, I guess. So where can they go to find you?
Yeah, you can find out more about me at my website, which is ElliotConnor.com. You can visit my charity's website, which is humannatureprojects.org, or you can find out my new podcast, which is called Human Nature. Just search that up in your favorite podcast directory.
Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on, Elliot. It has been a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your story and getting a idea of what it is that you're doing. So what I want to do real quick is just ask you one last thing. Do you have any final words of wisdom for our audience of entrepreneurs, for people who are looking to maybe start an organization and might be like you, young and full of ideas, but realize that you can actually do this? You have any final words of wisdom for us?
Ooh, I think my words of wisdom would be simple: do it. I think very much if you take that leap of faith, step out there, trying to take in some of what we've discussed, of course, this show, be authentic, tell your story, and try and ultimately achieve this vision of yours as a leader, then the only thing you can do is start out, make mistakes, learn from them, and see where it leads. Because ultimately, especially in COVID times, it can be hard to know where things are going to end up. Say Human Nature Projects, I couldn't have predicted where we'd be now, or where we will be in 12 months' time. So start out, have this vision, set goals, and work your ass off to achieve them, because that's the only way you're going to progress.
Absolutely. So you heard him. If you're thinking about starting something, just do it. Elliot, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.